look at the different macronutrients, protein raises insulin about half as much as carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are the most stimulating thing to insulin release. Fiber impacts insulin release, more fiber, less insulin release. Fat raises insulin a little bit, 15% or so. And fructose is converted to fat in the liver, so it doesn't actually raise insulin per se. So the interesting thing I found over time is that insulin is almost non-existent in a lot of blood work. You don't usually go to the doctor and get an insulin level checked, fasting insulin. But if you follow some cardiologists out there, they're very interested in insulin because your insulin can elevate for years and years and years without any changes in blood sugar. Okay? Your HbA1c, which is the average blood sugar over time, could stay normal for years and years and years while your insulin slowly creeps up. And why would that be? Because you just produce more insulin, right? The blood sugar homeostasis in your blood wants to be at certain levels, certain normal levels. When your sugar goes up, insulin's released, so sugar goes down. And if the sugar goes up and the insulin releases and the sugar stays up, it just gets more and more and more, okay? So you have these conditions where insulin starts to elevate, but there's no good way of measuring that unless you actually look at insulin. So normal insulin, we have, don't worry, I hope that's not too confusing, but basically all it says is insulin grows cells, grows muscle, grows fat, shuts fat burning down. Okay? But when you get to a point where insulin's getting too high, you start to have trouble with all those kinds of things. And this is just the combined carb thing I talked about earlier. When you combine foods, there is some theory that there's a synergistic effect to eating foods, and although carbohydrate is the most stimulating thing in insulin, meal sizes are a big factor. If you took all that little information I gave you and thought about it in the big picture, bigger the meal, more insulin you'll release, things like that. And that's about it for insulin. We'll talk about it a little more. In the meantime, we also have energy systems, right? We have energy systems. So how does our body respond to exercise, okay? Exercise can be at different intensities. The lower the intensity, the less sugar is going to be contributing as the energy source. The rule of thumb I usually go by is that if your heart rate's lower than 70% of your maximum, glycogen isn't the predominant fuel source. It's probably fat, hopefully, in a normal person. But the higher you get the intensity spectrum, the more glycogen is going to be demanded as an energy source. That's basically all this chart says with fancy pictures. And when you burn fat, you produce carbon dioxide, and when you burn glycogen, you produce carbon dioxide. Okay. Why is that important? Because when you look at fat loss, you can only burn so much fat at once in the resting state. All right? If you burn too much and your carbon dioxide gets too high, you probably pass out. So a lot of supplements, you're like, oh, you're gonna lose 10 pounds in 3 days. It's like, well, that's probably not fat, okay? Because you will not be able to stay awake or maybe alive. And so, what helps you burn fat? If you have to get rid of carbon dioxide. Breathing more,
oxygen.
of course.
I was
Breathing
saying.
more. Oxygen.
Oxygen.
Yes. You win the prize. Okay, so that's why exercise burns fat. More fat than not exercise. Okay, you can get rid of the carbon dioxide that's released, and you produce that energy. But interestingly enough, if you look at low carb, high fat diets, they lower blood levels of carbon dioxide. Low carb, high fat diets lower levels. What? Okay. Carbohydrate oxidation consumes 50% less water and generates 50% more carbon dioxide. The oxidation effect. So we burn carbs. It's more efficient in terms of the release of carbon dioxide, right? We don't release as much carbon dioxide. So, but this is an interesting thing, I think, to take away. It's the lipid energy model. Right? Highly debated. And one of the reasons why, I mean, this is all going to lead to nutrition.
We're going somewhere.
Yeah, we're going somewhere. But when we talk about energy, okay, when we talk about hunter-gatherers and things like that, they were in a state where they weren't always eating all the time. That's kind of something that we see right now. We're able to get food wherever we want, right? We go to the grocery store, we get a meal. So the weird thing about people who go on low-carb diets or carnivore diets or keto diets, when they get to a normal BMI, they get outrageous LDL levels. Outrageous. But they also get very, very low triglycerides and very, very high HDL levels, which I don't want to get too far into it, but it's a mystery, right? Now, the theory is that when you're fat adapted, when you are using fat as your energy source, and you're on a low insulin kind of diet, like that would be, that you actually burn a lot more fat. Okay, you burn a lot more fat. And why can you burn a lot more fat? Because it doesn't. Your blood levels of carbon dioxide. Well, you can. Apparently, you can just use fat as energy and have a normal breathing rate and have plenty of energy lying around, because ketones, which are the energy source in low fat or low carbohydrate diets, have a tremendous amount of energy. They have a lot more energy, right? Anyway, I don't want to get too far into the weeds with this, but as you burn more fat as a fuel, your fat in your blood goes up. Okay? As your fat in your blood goes up, it needs to be transported, okay, by your liver. VLDL is the transporter, takes the fat, moves it around. And once it releases the fat into the cell for energy so that it can be burned, LDL is the byproduct that goes back to the liver to turn into VLDL and take the fat out on its journey again. And when that happens, HDL is released. That's the lipid energy model in a nutshell. And if you want more information on that, I can gladly talk to you about it, but I don't want to get too far in the weeds with that. But metabolic flexibility and inflexibility. So when we talk about fat burning versus glucose burning, or sugar, or insulin, you should be able to do both. That's what you're designed to be. Okay? Throughout human history, you're able to use fat as a fuel source or sugar as a fuel source. And if you go on a low-carb diet, you should be able to produce ketones and burn fat. And if you don't eat a low carb diet. If you eat a high carb diet, you eat a lot of high glucose load foods, you might not be able to burn fat. I think that's what hopefully all of this showed you. So we talk about nutrition and CrossFit. You gotta talk about the classics. Eat meat, vegetables, nuts and seeds, some fruit, little starch, and no sugar. What kind of diet does that sound like? Paleo? Sounds pretty low carb, right?
Yeah.
CrossFit generally recommends a lower carb diet. And keep intake to levels that will support exercise and athletic fat. The zone diet. The zone diet is
Wow, that's a throwback.
You can eat 6 almonds.
That's
That's what's prescribed.
okay. So let me tell you about the zone diet. So the zone diet is why I was so skeptical. It was absolutely confusing to me when I first came about the zone diet. Blocks, I mean, blocks are Legos, okay? You hear about blocks. You hear about food. Yeah, it's a diet that has a macronutrient profile, 40% carbohydrates, 30% protein, 30% fat. Okay. You read Barry Sears' Zone Diet book. The premise was you would eat vegetables and fruits and low-fat proteins and monounsaturated fats and very little grains. You would keep your insulin levels low. You would get a complete essential nutrient plate where you would not need to take a single vitamin. And if you got hungry, you just ate more fat. That's basically the zone diet. You can thank me later. Okay. But the funny thing about the zone diet is I started the zone diet myself. I had pretty good results. I was triathlon training at the time. It seemed to work.
You gotta pull up the old picture of the other day.
I don't know when
Oh
I
my
did that.
gosh.
Oh gosh.
You have to find this picture.
But the funny thing was, my shirts reeked of acetone because I was in ketosis a lot. But it was fun. It was fun. I got really lean. I had a picture of me doing jump ropes one day, and I hit started. I had a six-pack, and I used to give people the zone diet in my early days of nutrition. I had one of my clients at the time come back to me a year later, and he said, "Man, it's funny. Like I thought I wanted to do something else, and I joined this other big program. I'm not going to name any names." He said, "And I realized it was just the zone diet." I got really mad. It was a lot of money. And geez, wouldn't you know it? That there's a lot of programs out there that are just the zone diet, repackaged. Yeah, you'll find that a lot. That macronutrient profile is very popular. So we got to talk about the science because there is zone diet science. There's an interesting study called the A to Z study that looked at the Atkins diet and the Ornish diet and the FDA food pyramid diet and the zone diet. And I think it was postmenopausal women. And they found that the zone diet, Dr. Barry Sears wasn't lying. Okay? The people who ate the zone diet improved all their essential nutrient intake. Okay, it was the only diet out of diets that a person wouldn't have to supplement it. So that was pretty interesting. But unfortunately, most nutritional science is highly biased and lacks power. Okay? nutritional science. For example, you were trying to look at fast food as a disease, right? Turns out a lot of people that eat fast food also smoke cigarettes, drink alcohol, and don't exercise. Okay. You want to compare them to people who ate more nutritious food? Lifestyle factors tend to populate in certain groups. Okay, let's just say that. There's limited data sharing in nutritional science, and science in general. So you come out with a study and be like, yeah, this is the study, and no, you can't see the data. Sometimes there's large measurement errors, practical findings that might include something that just isn't realistic. This is all from, pardon me, this is all from Dr. John Ivy's 2018 presentation at the Swiss RE Institute's Food for Thought. It's a really interesting presentation. He went there to, I guess, tell off the people who made this Mediterranean diet study. He's one of my favorite scientists, I'm sorry. I'm very partial to his work, but his examples were, well, if you drink 3 cups of coffee a day, it's going to increase your life expectancy by 12 years.
Oh, yeah.
Who knew? It's obviously a hard measure to make, okay? If you eat 1 hazelnut per day, you increase your life expectancy by 1 year. And it turns out it's correlative, so if you eat 100 a day, you live an extra 100 years.
I would be for it.
Okay, this is the state of nutritional science, right? People that do these studies, they have strong beliefs, and if they don't express their bias, it's highly suspect that the study is biased. Keep that in mind when you look at nutrition. And I'll talk about this a little more. But these are some great quotes, my favorite quotes. Most current evidence on nutrition at the population level is hopelessly biased and unreliable. The lowest form of epidemiology out there. It is a very unreliable science. It is most surely wrong. You're better off not reading any of these studies at all. You're better just going off of what your grandma told you.
Here you go, Ryan.
Okay, Prasad. And this one, I mean, Adele Height, this next quote, I mean, she's like a low carb person. And I'm not advocating, I mean, I do see how, I just think this is a good quote, okay? Part of the problem is that nutritional epidemiologists of the chronic disease suffer exactly 0 repercussions when the findings are reversed or made into policy with 0 or negative effect on health. Points for publishing, no demerits for uselessness. Wow!
Shots fired.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, if you want to find evidence for the diet you do, you're going to find it, and it's going to be positive, and you're going to be happy. Okay, that's the takeaway. I'm not here to debate scientific papers. But we are here to talk about sports nutrition, the most unhealthy lifestyle you can imagine. All right, who's read the Cube Method, Brandon Lilly? Anyone? If you want an example of the unhealthiness of sports nutrition, read the nutrition section of the Cube Method. You will be probably highly entertained. Okay, so most diets for sports lead to consumption of carbohydrates and drive insulin. That's just a fact. I mean, a lot of recommendations are 600, 700 grams of carbohydrates, high amounts of protein, maybe low fat, right? It's healthy. Most research is probably impractical for a lot of people because it's done in collegiate athletes or elite
Men.
athletes.
Men only.
Most diets for sports do not care about nutrient density. They just care that you're getting the calories and you're getting the macros. Could be anything. So I tend not to give out the sport nutrition advice by like the MSCA or things like that because I just don't feel like it's practical for most people. Sure, you could find that information. It's publicly available on the internet, but you just got to keep the perspective of the studies they use to establish those numbers, and it's probably not someone who,
Looks like you.
yeah, is your age, your activity level, okay? You're not training 4 hours a day with 3 times the amount of anabolic hormones that you normally have after 30. Okay? Just a different set of circumstances. What I do advocate for is periodized nutrition. And what that means is like you just change your food that you eat based on your activity level, but you're changing like the macronutrient quantity. Okay? What it really comes down to is if you exercise really intensely, you eat carbohydrates. That's periodizing nutrition. You make sure that you are incorporating low insulin, low carbohydrate meals into your dietary plan so that you stay metabolically flexible. And I think I skipped on one of the slides, talked about Dr. Laurent Banach, okay, Blue Performance is his company. And he specialized in metabolic flexibility in elite athletes. And you'd be surprised how many athletes at the elite level have really horribly unhealthy metabolism. Okay. They can sit there at resting and they're not burning fat, they're burning carbohydrates.
Hey Nate,
Yep.
is this kind of akin to like carb cycling?
Yes, yeah. That could be something,
Or
yeah.
what, a branch of kind of what you're talking about?
And this is part of the reason why I don't advocate for sports nutrition practices without realizing what the risks are, right? If you want to eat a high carbohydrate diet, you have to consider the risk, right? If you want to be the elite level, there are always trade-offs. If you talk to most sports nutritionists at professional level teams, they will tell you it's absolutely a horrible, unhealthy way to eat. Okay? But the practicality of sport nutrition research is that we know that carbohydrates are good for intensity, they help performance, they help recovery, protein requirements that are helpful for training and all these kinds of things. There's a lot of benefit from the science, of course. And so this slide has been around as long as I have. The snow made it for me a long time. Okay. And it's from Bob Seebahar's book, Nutrition Periodization for Athletes, which is a really practical, healthy way to approach sport nutrition, I feel. And it means that 90% of your meals, or all your meals, basically have protein, vegetables, and fruit. Okay, you have a base. You have a target you're trying to hit in the middle, and the target is protein, vegetables, and fruit. You're trying to get a good amount of protein to support muscle, and then the vegetables and fruit to support essential nutrients and healthy digestion and things like that. And then when you train, the little orange circle on the outside is complex carbohydrate. And hopefully you got from this presentation that the choice of complex carbohydrate you make is probably more advantageous to be high in essential nutrients. Okay. So your starchy tubers, things like that, vegetable sources of complex carbs do have advantages in that respect, where you're not only getting the carbohydrate you need, you're also getting lots of vitamins and minerals that you need to help replenish And then zone 3, which is you're completely missing the bucket. All right. There are times when, you're training hard, and it makes you happier to eat something that doesn't fit those categories. Okay, whatever that might be. For me, it's dried figs. I love dried figs.
Dried dates.
Dried dates. Excuse me. I always get this. Just some kind of thing that helps you feel like you're recovering better, right? Something that I recommend is refeeding. Like, if you're training every day, twice a day. Excuse me.
Was that a sneeze?
Yeah. You probably want to be doing that somewhere. All right. You don't always. You need. Like for me, Monday through I try to train Monday through Saturday. Wednesday or Thursday, I'm usually doing something. I'm usually eating something that recovers glycogen and things like that. Usually incorporate a refeeding, if you will. And it could be protein related and glucose related. So you can eat. I like to eat a steak.
I think everyone does.
For dessert.
No.
Whatever makes you happy, okay? Hopefully that's also what you take away from this. There's science to make you happy. Alright, so people ask all the time, like, what do you recommend? I recommend this, okay? The reason why this is on the wall is not for,
It's pretty.
yeah, not for like pleasing the eye. It's got a purpose. Okay, it's not just a bunch of colors spattered on paper. Yeah, you want to be consuming a certain amount of protein. The general recommendation that's probably agreed upon across the board is about 1 gram per pound, which is actually higher than the zone diet recommendation. And people are always like, well, isn't that going to kill my kidneys or kill me? Or there's debate about that, but Dr. Jose Antonio, he really wanted to figure out the answer to that, so he gave people, initially it was 3 grams per pound of body weight protein for 6 months, and I think it went to 4 grams per pound of body weight for 6 months, and I would not want to be in a room with that person with closed doors and no ventilation, but 0 effects on the kidneys. What? That's ridiculous. Okay, no signs of kidney damage. Interesting study, right? Probably not practical. I don't know anyone who's going to do that. The other interesting thing was that they lost weight and gained muscle. They lost body fat, lost weight, and gained muscle. They were on a very high calorie diet. But anyway, we don't want to make those assumptions. Carbohydrates, very widely. Okay, there's so many different types, right? That's why generalizing is tough, right? If you say, well, carbs, you got to eat carbs, right?
What kinds?
Yes, exactly. There are recommendations for different types of diets. If you want to do keto, you definitely want to be probably at least under 50 grams, probably under 30 grams, some people under 15 grams. That's very genetically dependent. Okay, if you want to go on a ketogenic diet. And the reason why you go on a ketogenic diet, maybe you do have issues with insulin, maybe you do have issues with losing weight. I find that a lot of people, especially postmenopausal women, like in that A to Z study, the Atkins diet, the keto diet, was the most effective, right? Hormone shifts and aging and all that stuff, I'm sorry. Okay, and then there comes the funny part. Well, what's low carb? Oh gosh, I still don't know. I'm 100% honest with you. I still don't know what low carb is in terms of a collected definition of low carbohydrate. And that was one of the big debates the science of low carbohydrate diets, when you're comparing low carbohydrate diets to other diets, Mediterranean diets, all that other stuff, the definition of what low carbohydrate was very different between each diet. Nobody could really come up with the number. But I think Mark Sisson, Paleo Blueprint, he came up with less than 150 grams, I believe, was his definition of low carbohydrate. And I think that's probably a decent definition of low carbohydrate diet.
Is that daily?
What?
Less than 150 grams daily?
150 grams daily.
Okay.
So, for sport, for sport, like, what's healthy for sport, I usually, if a person's pretty active, like about a gram per pound is probably not a bad place to experiment with. Again, we're talking about N of 1, right? I apologize, I guess we're going over time now a little bit. All right, and then, high carb, 2 to 3 grams per pound, start to get pretty high up there. 4 or 5, probably not uncommon in certain athletes. And then fat, fat, you want 60 to 70% of your fats to be good for keto. Keto works for strength athletes. Carbohydrate is not completely necessary for some strength sports. Paleo, 30 to 40% fat. There's general training, and then low fat. You're going to see that a lot in competitive athletes, physique athletes, people who are doing weight cuts. All right. This was a slide. I like to think about insulin load when I give dietary recommendations, and I think the easiest way to reduce insulin load, and we're getting pretty close to the end here, is through intermittent fasting, another generalized term to mean many, many different things. We'll talk about that, but basically, how do you reduce calories? And this is the funny thing, people always debate, well, intermittent fasting has no difference between calorie restriction. You just lower your calories, measure your food, and you're going to get the same results. Why would you intermittent fast? Well, there are benefits to not eating. Like we talked about, insulin load, reducing your calories will reduce your insulin load, but those calories are coming from glycemic load foods that are high, you're still going to get maybe elevated insulin. But there's things to look at in terms of the studies that match calories. So they have someone do intermittent fasting, have someone do, they're both calorie restricted, but they have the same amount of calories every day, except one group does 12 hours of not eating, 12 hours of eating. One group does 16 hours of not eating, 8 hours of eating. One group eats whenever they want. There have been significant results in body fat percentage, composition, and insulin sensitivity. So I think that's the kind of takeaway. And when people talk about, well, intermittent fasting doesn't work, it's like, what kind of intermittent fasting is what you probably should ask, because you can do time-restricted feeding, which is one style where you eat a certain part of the day and you don't eat the rest. And that could be categorized as 23 to 1, 23 hours not eating, 1 hour eating, otherwise known as 1 meal a day, OMAD. 20 hours not eating, 4 hours of eating. I know someone who was 300 and, I don't remember, pounds. Went to the doctor, had type 2 diabetes. I used to lift with them. Was told that their kidneys were at 50% function and they were going to need a kidney transplant or to go on dialysis. And they did a 24 intermittent fast regimen, low carb. Got down to 190 pounds, reversed their diabetes. Okay. Maybe they could have restricted their calories. Shame on them. Okay. 18-6, 16-8, 14-10, I don't know. The general consensus is you have to fast for at least 12 hours for or to your time restriction. Okay? And that works better for women, the longer feeding windows, typically, especially postmenopausal women.
The longer feeding window, you say?
The longer,
So like a
yeah,
12,
yeah, longer
12
feeding
or-
windows, yeah.
Okay.
Just smaller meals, longer feeding windows. Yeah, for what it is. Alternate day fasting, you eat one day, you don't eat the next day. 5-2, you eat for 5 days, 2 days a week you don't. Or sometimes this can be like really, you can eat one meal of less than 500 calories. Periodic fasting, well, you just don't eat. Data-driven fasting is something I've been doing myself, self-experiment, and I've won just out of curiosity for my own blood sugar levels, how I respond to food, things like that. And that's been my own journey lately. I've recommended to other people who probably found similar interesting findings. Okay. And yeah. Okay, so here we go. This is what you're ready for. The general recommendations: you should avoid stale and expired food. Okay, I will stand behind that statement.
Healthy bacteria, man.
No, I mean, my general recommendations, I guess, I was going to sum it up. This is like the summaries. Focus on protein. Insulin, I didn't talk about this with insulin, but insulin is a growth hormone that you want, absolutely want, until you're about 20. Right? I mean, how else would you turn from this to this? You need your organs to grow, you need your bones to grow, you need insulin around from the age you're born or in the womb, or I don't know, till roughly, 20 to 30 years old. And that's the important thing to consider, is that once you hit 30, where do you have to grow?
This way.
So the amount of insulin that you need is highly reduced in that respect. Right? Something to consider. And more and more, there are more physicians out there that are advocating for higher protein diets as people age, especially after 30, 40 years old, and lower insulin kind of style diets, if you will, different types of eating. 5 to 6 servings of vegetables and fruits daily. Man, I couldn't find this study and I really got bummed out, but there was a really cool study looking at all these kinds of cultures around the world and what they ate and the commonality between them. And health metrics, and the healthier cultures tended to eat 5 to 6 servings of vegetables and fruits. Something that I just, with the hand measuring, recommend in general anyway, but there is some interesting science out there looking at that. Nutrient dense, tolerable carbohydrates. What does tolerance mean? Well, you can ask your spouse you sleep with what carbohydrate tolerance is. Okay, flatulence, diarrhea, stomach upset. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, not everyone does, okay? Everyone's level of tolerance is different, and I interpret tolerance as your ability, what you're comfortable with, okay? I think I was telling Amon the story of this. Found a blog by a really famous vegan bodybuilder. And this guy is impressive. And they said, so what's the hardest part about being a vegan bodybuilder? And he said, well, the farting is I live alone.
For good reason.
It's like, why is this guy not? Oh, he has a constant. Oh. Well, obviously, he tolerates it. So yeah, there's an individual component of that. Okay, so like I said, 70% heart rate. All right, if you're leading to intense exercise, it's obviously not that you hit 70% heart rate for 2 seconds. The carbohydrates you consume is probably going to be proportional to the amount of time your heart rate is that high, right? To replenish. And if you're doing sports, generally when you're doing like an endurance event, about an hour in, if it's going to be lasting for more than an hour, you probably want to start replenishing things like carbohydrates. If it's lasting more than 2 hours, probably want to start replenishing things like proteins. All right, depending on how long it goes. Weight loss, I don't recommend losing more than 1% of your body weight per week because that's dehydration. There's a definition of dehydration. Trouble with that is that if you go to a low carb diet, you do lose a lot of water, typically. So you will lose initially probably more than that, but as long as you're staying hydrated, that's okay. But do not convince yourself that if you lose more than 1% in a week that it's fat, unless you did like 5 marathons. I recommend not losing weight for longer than a few months. Someone's trying to lose weight, you should take a break every few months for a couple months, try to maintain the weight you're at. Okay, when you're losing weight, it is a stress to your body. You do have hormone signaling shifts. And over time, you want those to kind of rebalance so that it doesn't go into like kind of a harmful state. And yeah, so like I usually say like try not to lose more than 5% body weight at a time. When you're trying to lose weight, and then take a break. Okay. Weight gain, same thing. You don't want to gain a bunch of weight either. Just some links. I was gonna open this up, but basically the Precision Nutrition Calorie Control Guide is a periodized nutrition strategy. So if you wanted to look at how to cater your meals to your training and your individual goals and who you are, it's a really great guide. I highly recommend it. That's what that poster is based off of. And then supplements, to finish it off. 50% of people are deficient in vitamin D, magnesium, zinc, or vitamin K2. I might have gotten that wrong, but something like that. So I want you to look over to your neighbor and tell them that they're deficient in vitamins. It's very common. Okay, even if you eat well, to have maybe a minor deficiency. And we talk about these things, you want to consider the work of Bruce Ames, the triage theory, where your body partitions nutrients based on survivability. So your brain, heart, and lungs are the first to get the nutrients, then other organs that are vital for functioning, and then your muscle. Okay, so even though you might take the recommended daily values, which are basically survivability values of these things, if you're training hard and you're very muscular, you might require higher levels of those nutrients. Because your muscles get it last. And it's interesting when you lose fat, it kind of goes like that. You lose, lean out appendages first, neck, head, around the chest, and then around the belly. Think about insulin release, it's in the stomach, and then the other appendages. But anyway, sport, okay. So yeah, basically the supplements I recommend maybe considering supplementing with would be those essential nutrients, vitamin D, magnesium, zinc, and omega-3. It could be vitamin K2. Could be other ones, but general. And then sport, the ones that are effective are creatine, caffeine, beta-alanine, and glutamine. Effective, okay? I mean, just trying to work out for an hour and stay healthy. I mean, what kind of effectiveness do you want? If you're trying to compete with sport, they might make considerable change in your performance. But depends on you guys. So I really appreciate you take. Oh, and these are, you know, if you're gonna take any supplements, I recommend getting supplements that have been vetted, tested. Labdoor.com, consumerlab.com, those good things. I really appreciate you taking over time. I said this would be an hour and a half. And, for 5 minutes.